Gold market wrap. Of course, it is Sunday night, and I'm doing the Friday market wrap live. I'm even simulcasting it on X. The reason I wasn't able to do the update on Friday, it's not because I was hiding because of the big decline in gold and silver. I was in El Salvador for the Plan B conference, Tether's conference. And so I just got back earlier this afternoon, and I didn't really feel like doing the update from my hotel room, and I had other things that I was doing down in El Salvador. So I decided to do it on Sunday night. You know, when I got on the plane to fly down to El Salvador late Thursday morning, silver was above 120. It had traded above 121. In fact, silver made its all-time record high on Thursday. Same with gold. It was above 5,550. Can't remember the exact price. But when I landed, because I had no internet for the 3.5-hour flight, the jet didn't have any Starlink, so I was kind of blind. And so when I landed and I went on my phone, I saw what had happened to gold and silver on Thursday. There was about a 10-minute period where gold dropped like $300. I forget exactly how much, but it was a huge drop and an even bigger drop in silver. So both gold and silver closed way down on the day. I forget where silver closed. It was still, I believe it was above 100, but barely. Gold closed above 5,100, but still about, what, $500 off of its high. And then the following day, on Friday, it was even worse. And gold and silver got killed again. Gold closing below 5,000. It closed at about 4,900, I think, $4,900 approximately. So, yeah, gold must have closed, it must have closed well above 5,100. It must have been 50, 52, or 53, I forget. And it was lower. It was lower during the day. It didn't close on the low, but it closed pretty close. Silver got all the way down to below 80. In fact, about an hour before I just went live, silver was down almost $8. It was trading at around $77 an ounce, so about 36% below the record high that it hit on Thursday. Now, as I am recording this live, silver has actually bounced back, and it's now up $1.50. So it's back at around $86.50. And gold, which was almost down $200 earlier, I think I saw it down about 170, 180, is now down about 57. And in fact, 5 minutes ago, it was only down 20. So it's a very volatile session, but it follows an unprecedented collapse in gold and silver prices. Unprecedented in the dollar value that's wiped out on paper during the decline, and the magnitude in such a short period of time. Yes, you know, silver has dropped 36%, just not this quickly. Same thing with gold, right? Gold has fallen by, 10, 15%, but just not in 2 days, right? This is really an unprecedented move down. Now, the question is, why did this happen? And does it change anything? Right? Am I now bearish on gold or silver because of this big drop? Now, the first thing to keep in mind is we just had this crash in gold and silver, right? But silver is right now over $86 an ounce. A couple of weeks ago, that would have been an all-time record high. So yes, we've had this spectacular decline, but all it did is bring silver back to where it was a couple of weeks ago, right? It erased this, major move up, but I don't think it's done any real damage to the bull market. It may have done some damage to some speculators who were highly leveraged and maybe got in recently and now got, stopped out and lost money. Same thing with gold. Gold is still close to 5,000. It's 4,800. They ran Tucker ran the first part of our interview last week. And when they aired it or, put it on X, gold was above 5,000. It was close to its high, with maybe 5,200, 5,300. But when I recorded it, it had just hit 4,000, like 4 weeks earlier. So we're still considerably above, 20% above. In fact, even though gold was down $500 on Friday, which was the last day of the month, I think January was still the best month ever, despite losing $500 an ounce. And $500 an ounce is more than gold was worth when I first started buying it. Same thing with silver. Silver just lost $30 an ounce in a day. It was just a year or so ago, I was buying silver for $30 an ounce. And it lost in one day the equivalent of what its entire price was, not too long ago. Right? So it was a huge, huge move down. But in the scheme of things, and years from now, nobody's even going to notice this. It's just going to be a small blip on the chart. So the question is, does this change anything? No. In fact, people should be buying this dip. This is a great opportunity. I lost more money on paper personally on Friday than I've ever lost on any day of my life. I mean, it's not even close. It didn't even bother me that I lost all that money because a couple of weeks earlier, I didn't even have that money, right? Easy come, easy go. But as far as I'm concerned, I haven't lost anything because I'm just as confident as I was a week ago that prices are going much higher. And so it doesn't bother me that assets that I had no intention of selling went down. In fact, I'm happy about it because there are still a lot of people that I am trying to get to buy gold and silver. And so this is an opportunity. I would much rather my followers, my audience, buy silver at 86 than 120. And so the fact that it's come down is great. In fact, I'm a little upset that silver bounced so quickly. I was hoping it was still below 80 when I did this update, because I wanted to encourage people to go to SCHIFF Gold and buy. Now, I still would buy, but yeah, I would have liked it if it was still $8, $9 an ounce cheaper. That would have been great. And in fact, I checked on the SCHIFF Gold website, and I checked our prices, and we've got the best prices of any of the reputable, known gold and silver companies by at least $3 or $4 an ounce on silver. In fact, right now, if you go to SCHIFF Gold, the 1 ounce silver buffaloes, if you're only buying one, are $93.90. Now, an hour ago, we were at 88, right? That's how they've moved. It's about 10% above the spot price, which is higher than it normally is. But if you go to the largest online retailers of gold and silver, you'll see they're $3 or $4 higher per ounce minimum. And that's a big savings when it comes to silver. And the same thing with gold. Gold right now, we're selling 1 ounce maple leafs right about exactly $5,000 an ounce. And gold's around $48.30. So that's a higher spread than we would normally have. But good luck trying to find somebody else selling it cheaper. But the point is, that's 10% lower than it was Thursday. So I think it's a great opportunity. Is it possible that gold goes lower and silver goes lower? Of course it's possible, but who cares? The point is to accumulate as much gold and silver as you can. And the even better buying opportunities are in the mining stocks. They got decimated. That's one of the reasons I lost so much on paper on Friday, is because I have so much gold and silver mining stocks. So I would also encourage people to be buying these stocks on Monday. Don't worry if they go any lower. And look at my gold fund, the Euro Pacific Gold Fund, EPGIX. But anyway, let me get into, what I think happened. And of course, I don't have any proof, right? I am just trying to make sense out of something that really doesn't make any sense unless you view it from the prism that I'm looking at it. So gold and silver prices had been moving up by, record amounts. And the dollar had just fallen to a 4-year low, the dollar index. And this dollar had fallen to an all-time record low against the Swiss franc. And the bond market was starting to roll over. I think that Scott Bessent and some other people close to the president talked to the president and said, we got a problem here, right? Maybe Jerome Powell thinks what's happening in gold is irrelevant, but it's not. It is very relevant. And I think there was a real danger of the gold price and the silver price continuing to rise, but have that spill over in a more damaging way in the foreign exchange market and in the bond market. So I think the Trump administration realized that they needed to do something to stop this, right? They had to figure out a way to kind of derail this train, slow it down, do anything, buy some time. And so what I think they did is they coordinated with some short sellers, whether it's big banks, about, going after silver on the Thursday. Because if you look at what happened, right, the huge drop in the price of gold and silver in just a few minutes is the result of a huge sell order hitting the futures market, like randomly, like at the market. Now, if you had a lot of silver or gold that you wanted to sell, would you just dump it on the market all at once? Or would you try to slowly get out without impacting the price or impacting it as little as possible so that you could get the highest possible price for the gold and silver that you're selling? That's what would make sense. But if you just dump a huge order on the market, knocking the price down, meaning that you end up selling your gold and silver at a much lower price than you might have got had you, been more quiet about gradually selling. It's clear that the real intent of the sale was not to get a good price on what you're selling, but to drive the price of what you're selling lower. So it was an attempt to move the market down. And it worked, right? The market went down a lot. But then what the government did is Donald Trump ended up on Friday morning, sooner than was anticipated, because it was supposed to happen next week or this week. He announced his pick, Kevin Warsh, to be the new Fed chair. Now, when that pick was announced, there seemed to be a coordinated, PR campaign around that pick, that it was a surprise pick, even though, he had been a front runner, all along. He wasn't the front runner, but he was, a pretty good bet, like 30%, 40%. I mean, he, from the beginning. So it's not like he's a major outlier. He's somebody that was out there as, one of the guys, one of the top 3 candidates for Fed chair. So it's not like this, is a complete shock, right? But they try to spin it as if nominating Kevin Warsh means that Trump has now done something that was unexpected. And that's because they're now positioning Warsh as this major inflation hawk who doesn't like quantitative easing and who, doesn't like low interest rates, saying he's one of the few FOMC members when he was there before, around 2008 timeframe, who was arguing for higher rates and was a critic of quantitative easing. And so all of their media reports, and I think the administration was behind this narrative, and Wall Street ran with it, that, this is going to be, Warsh is going to be a hawk, and, he's not going to be a Trump puppet. He's not, Trump's not going to, be pulling the strings, and that he's going to be more hawkish than Powell, that he's probably less likely to cut interest rates than Powell, and maybe even he's going to start advocating for rate hikes. And maybe he's going to want to go back to quantitative tightening, right? This is how they're spinning it, right? That he's a real independent guy, hard money guy, Austrian economist, almost like they nominated me, right? Peter Schiff, or, they're not using my name, but, they say, well, maybe it's like Judy Shelton, or, like it's an unconventional pick. But this guy, is going to shake up the Fed in that he's a hard money guy who really wants to fight inflation, right? This is what they're saying, right? And so that helped fuel the sell-off in gold and silver. And I think whoever it was that started the selling on Thursday had the inside information that was probably going to happen. And it was all part of the plan to first hit gold and silver on Thursday, and then, that like a 1-2 punch, get the technicals like a reversal of one day, and then come out with this supposed surprise game changer to say, hey, everything you were worried about, right? People were worried about a loss of Fed independence. They were worried about, a Fed that's going to be slashing rates and doing QE. And in one, swoop, they diffuse that bomb and say, oh, look, Trump did something completely unexpected. So all the people who were buying gold and silver because they expected easy money, right? Rate cuts, lots of money printing, inflation. You're all wrong, because look who Trump picked to be the Fed chairman. He picked Kevin Warsh, right? He's an ultra hawk. It's like, Paul Volcker, right? This is what is out there in the media. And I think it's all a bunch of BS. I don't think that Trump would have appointed Kevin Warsh if he thought that's what he was going to do. Trump has spent his entire presidency criticizing too late Powell. Why is Trump criticizing Powell? Because he thinks we should have bigger rate cuts than the ones that we've already had. He wants to get rid of Powell because he hasn't cut rates enough. And he told everybody that he wants to put somebody at the Fed who's going to cut rates. Now, the gold and silver market believed that, which is why gold and silver hit record highs. But now we're expected to believe that that's not the case, that Trump has had a change of heart, that he no longer wants a Fed chairman who is going to cut rates. He wants one who's going to raise rates. And, Powell is not raising rates, so let's get rid of him and put somebody in there who's going to hike interest rates. There is no way that is the case. Now, maybe what they're trying to do is create the false impression that they've put a hard money inflation hawk at the Fed so that when he does cut rates, people will think, well, I guess, rate cuts are appropriate, because otherwise Warsh, this inflation hawk, right, wouldn't have cut rates, right? Maybe it's to provide cover, because I believe that Kevin Warsh has his marching orders, and he is going to do exactly what Donald Trump wants him to do, because if that wasn't the case, he would not have been picked for the job. So forget about what they're portraying to the public about how he's independent and how he's a hawk. If that were the case, somebody else would have got the job. But it makes sense to me that they want to position himself that way, because it was clear in the precious metals market that the way he had previously positioned it was a problem. When he was telling the truth, the markets believed him, and we were, on the verge of a dollar collapse. So he had to come up with a way to fool the markets into believing that he wasn't going to do exactly what he is going to do. I mean, unless you think that all of Trump's criticism of Powell was just an act, that he secretly didn't want Powell to cut rates, but he just wanted to chastise him for not doing it, so he would have a scapegoat in the Fed, to blame things on if, things turn south, and say it's because Powell didn't cut rates. But I don't think, I'm not going to read that much into it. I think Trump was being honest in his criticism of Powell. He wanted lower rates. There's no question that he wants lower rates because he wants to blow air into the bubble. The problem was, by telling the markets that that's what he wanted, we were getting a crash of the dollar relative to gold and silver that was about to spill over into the foreign exchange markets. And so he had to do something. He had to stop this alarm from sounding. And so they came up with this plan to position Warsh as this independent inflation fighter and coordinate this massive short selling in gold futures, which, of course, is where everything took place, right? This was not in the physical market. The people who sold all this gold and silver don't own any gold and silver. They sold what they do not own and what they cannot deliver. And there, I think, is going to be the problem, because this market is going to rise, and I think it's going to rise a lot faster than the shorts believe. The people who were buying gold and silver, the real buyers who were buying it at 90 or buying silver at 90 and 100 and 110, they're not going to stop buying because it's back down to 86. They're going to buy more. The real physical buyers who were buying gold at 5,500 are not going to stop buying it because it's 4,800. They're going to buy more, right? Forget about what the speculators and the futures traders are doing. Yeah, I mean, people that just, trying to gamble and make money off of the price fluctuations, yeah, they may change. I think what just happened, a lot of people got burned, and they may think twice before buying futures on gold or silver again. And I think some people may have been scared out of the spot market, by the volatility, which is probably one of the goals of the Trump administration, is to try to slow down the rise, right? It's like if you're trying to kill the coal miners, you want to keep the canary alive, right? You don't want the canary to die and then the miners have a chance to get out. If your plan is for them to die, you got to keep that canary alive. And if he looks like he's going to die, you got to figure out what can we do? How can we help this canary keep chirping along so the miners don't get wise to the poison gas, right? That's in the mine. And I was listening to an interview that Trump had late last week, about the housing market, right? They talk about the affordability crisis in housing. And the obvious free market solution, when home prices are unaffordable, they go down. Because ultimately what determines the price of a home is what people can pay, right? If you sell your home, somebody has to buy it. And if nobody can afford to buy it, then you can't sell your home unless you lower the price to a level where somebody can afford it. So ultimately, the free market is going to solve the problem of housing unaffordability by lowering prices. Now, Donald Trump was asked about that, and his response was his number one priority is to make sure housing prices don't go down. And then he said, in fact, I want housing prices to keep going up. And he said that is his goal because he doesn't want to make people who own homes less rich than they are right now, which I guess would include himself. He owns a lot of real estate too. But he was talking about, average baby boomers who own a home and where that home is the majority of their wealth because of the appreciation. And his goal is to make sure that prices don't decline. In fact, he wants them to keep going up. So he doesn't want houses to be affordable. He wants them to become even more unaffordable than they are right now. But what is Donald Trump's solution then. How are people going to buy houses that they can't afford?